Stan Lee was as recognizable to comic book fans as the superheroes he created: X-Men, the Hulk, and the Amazing Spider-Man.
I tried to keep them realistic, and I don't know of anybody more realistic than I am. So whatever little things worried me, I'd have Spider-Man worry about them too.
He also gave his characters real-life flaws.
The mere fact that he has superhuman power doesn't mean that he may not have acne, or he may not have trouble with his girlfriend, or get a sinus attack in the middle of a fight.
Lee took a job as an assistant at a comic publisher when he was 16 that eventually grew into Marvel Comics, and Lee rose to become its president. But in 1998, Marvel forced Lee out. He spent years in lawsuits with the company and Disney to get a share of profits from movies and TV shows based on his characters. Lee went on to start his own companies. He also joined forces with his longtime rivals at DC Comics, putting his own spin on their superheroes, including Batman and Wonder Woman. He was born Stanley Lieber, but signed his comics Stan Lee to protect his reputation.
I didn't want to be known by my regular name as a comic book writer, because it was embarrassing.
He thought he'd move on to more serious writing, but he ultimately embraced his alter ego, even changing his name and making frequent cameos in movies based on his characters.
I think you never outgrow your love for things that are that colorful or much bigger than life. Along comes superhero comics. They're really, I think, fairy tales for grown-ups.
By the early 70s, Stan Lee was king of the Marvel Universe, but he felt it was a realm without honor, so he embarked on a quest to win respect for his art and himself.
I used to give an example during my speeches. If Michelangelo and Shakespeare were alive today, and if Shakespeare said, "Hey Mike, how about you and me doing a comic strip? I'll write it, you draw it." And Michelangelo said, "Great idea, Bill." And they sat down and they did a comic strip. Who would dare to say that wasn't an art form?
Stan, while he worked long and hard gaining respect for comics in his milieu, once he got that fame, once he hit the pinnacle, he's never retreated from it.
Stan's visibility on college campuses during the hippie era personified Marvel, but created unexpected ripples at the home office.
Dr. Strange became a big hit, and people would write in and say, "Oh, Dr. Strange must be on drugs," and we'd all look at each other and say, "Drugs? Drugs? What are they talking about, drugs?" I mean, you know, we just didn't know any of that.
The 60s and 70s expanded comics as well as minds.
I suddenly discovered that there were no blacks in comics, that nobody had made a story about blacks. I felt that blacks had to be represented in comics as well as everywhere else. So I drew the Black Panther. I drew him as a powerful and virtuous character.
Following the Black Panther, Lee and Kirby added Luke Cage, hero for hire, to the Fantastic Four.
Luke Cage was the first black superhero to have his own book. I mean, it was a very interesting time for comics. The whole world was changing and stuff in terms of America, and once again, Marvel Comics stepped up to the plate and set a precedent.
And I don't think that should ever be forgotten. There were no real black superheroes, really good black superheroes.
I think it's very significant. I think it's significant to black children. I think it's significant to all children that the world of the comics reflects the diverse world that we live in.
I'm happy to say that even though I was told, "Oh, you'll never sell these books in the South, and you'll never sell these books here, there, and everywhere," the book sold beautifully, which made me feel good about mankind in general.
By this time, Stan had become the comic industry's leading spokesman. His fame drove a wedge between the longtime collaborators.
There were interviews done that would interview Stan Lee. Stan would talk at length about how Jack contributed to the storylines, and the interview would come out saying, Stan Lee has all the ideas, Jack Kirby just draws up what Stan says. This is not true. It's something Stan never really maintained.
Kirby left Marvel in 1970. Meanwhile, a succession of new artists and writers took up the torch as Stan set his sights on other forms of storytelling. For 4 years, between 1978 and 1982, and later in 3 made-for-TV movies, the Incredible Hulk was a television phenomenon. It also became a lifelong identification for the twice-champion Mr. Universe, who played him from the heart.
You knew he was a great guy. He was innocent. It's not like, oh my God, it's Frankenstein with this other character where you get people to scream. But when you see him, you instantly identify that he's a harmless creature lost in the body, like Gillespie.
Superheroes are comics' most popular characters, but everyone knows they're fiction. In 1977, Stan brought real superheroes into the Marvel Universe in the form of the theatrical rock group KISS.
To get a phone call from Marvel Comics, which to me was Mount Olympus, you know. I grew up with Dr. Doom and the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and all that stuff, and Captain America. So you get a phone call from the house that gave birth to all that, saying, we'd like you to join our stable. Would be like Zeus inviting you to come and become one of the gods who walk the face of the earth.
But Zeus had a life outside Mount Olympus. At home, Stan and Joan saw their daughter JC blossom as a young writer and actress, even though growing up involved some competition.
All the children in the neighborhood wanted to come to my house, and they didn't want to leave once they arrived. And I think that it's been unjust to a whole community of parents how spectacular and larger than life mine have been.
I think she's a mixture of both of us. She's very talented. I think it's difficult being a child of 2 such strong parents. I think that's always difficult, and we are forceful.
Dad isn't someone who is insecure about his work or insecure about himself. And I remember, if anything, wanting to be a part of it, or wanting him to ask my opinion, or wanting to share in the, the process or in the art. But there was never the question or the conversation of it, because he's very, it's just between him and himself.
But not entirely. Since joining Marvel in 1940, Stan had always been Martin Goodman's employee. In 1968, Goodman had suddenly sold the company to Cadence Industries, a troubled conglomerate. By the early 80s, Cadence was a fiscal shambles. Once again, superheroes came to the rescue. They were called the X-Men. Born in the 60s, they steadily grew in popularity.
The X-Men were the ultimate for me, because they were not only human beings, but they were complete outcasts, a new minority, mutants, not black, Jewish, Hispanic, whatever, mutants. Everybody hated them.
The X-Men, a group of mutants coalesced by Professor Charles Xavier into a crime-fighting team. The X-Men preach tolerance, even toward those who hate them because they're different.
Those first few issues sold magnificently. But what happened was, Jack and I started the strip. But for some reason, we didn't realize it was going to become as big a strip as it was. And Jack had other things to do, and he didn't have time to do the X-Men also. So I said, well, Jack, why don't you stay with the Fantastic Four and stay with Thor and with Nick Fury and whatever else he was doing. And I gave the X-Men to different artists who were good, but they weren't Jack Kirby. A few years later, new artists took it over, new writers. Chris Claremont at one point started writing it and did a magnificent job. And artists like John Byrne took it over and so forth. And it got a new surge of popularity. And today, the X-Men are the best-selling group of comic books, I guess, in the world.